Five Nights at Freddy's, Security Breach. Better known as literally anything shorter than that. A game with many flaws and yada yada whatever.
Feel tired out?
Every small FNAF channel on YouTube has redesigned Security Breach before, but who cares? I love thinking about game design, and I love criticizing my favorite games, so now it's my turn. Nothing's a good redesigning without a proper plan. Most Security Breach redesign videos go more towards the direction of an old, rundown Chuckler's cheese like the old FNAF games. However, I quite like the general identity of Security Breach currently, so as a general rule for myself, I want to retain the futuristic 80s in the 2040s look of everything. You might think that makes things easy, but in reality, keeping everything looking the same might end up as more of a fun limitation, especially for goal number 1, more spooky. Lack of scariness is a common complaint from people who aren't me, yet I'll try to address these demands anyway.
Get out of here. What do you mean?
This mainly boils down to people thinking the enemies and environments aren't scary, which will be real interesting to solve without changing the visuals. Luckily though, the rest of my goals don't involve Security Breach's visual identity, such as 2. Vanny. More Vanny. 3. Burn Trap. Out of here. As far as we can guess, Burn Trap was either a confusing way to reveal the mimic or a completely unexplained separate thing. And neither of those options are that great. If it were up to me, I wouldn't even include any teaser to the mimic existing, it'd just all be Vanny. Thankfully, it is up to me. Unthankfully, I should probably make sure that Ruin still makes sense as a follow-up, so I guess we gotta do something with the mimic at the very least. 4. So, little confession. When I first watched Funny Markiplier's Funny Markiplier FNAF playthrough of Security Breach, I formed my own expectations of what the game would be since I didn't know anything going in, and basically, long story short, I was convinced for quite a while that A, the game was an open exploration game. The various upgrades and keycards around the Pizzaplex even made me think it was kind of like a Metroidvania in a sense. But also B, I thought the game would actually take place over 5 nights. In fact, I thought that all the way up to here. And I thought, man, he's dismantled 2 of the 3 bots already on night 1? What would even be left to do during the next 4 nights? Oh, so yeah, I'm a little dumb, but in my defense, I'm also stupid. To delete my past mistakes, goal number 4 is to make the game a bit more like an open exploration game. And 5 is that we're gonna actually have 5 nights at Freddy's. Oh my god, that's the name of the series. So with the core tenets established, we may now forge on and design a game that fully addresses this all without compromising the current visual identity. That's easier said than done, of course, but luckily for us, we're only saying and not doing, so this should be pretty easy. Well, isn't this counterproductive? Bro claims he doesn't want to change the visuals and then starts immediately with environment. But don't worry, that just means that this won't take too long, which I'm sure will be a luxury going forward, so bask in the briefness of my environmental thoughts. For the most part, I want to keep my expectations reasonable, but if you would allow me a single unreasonable request, I'd probably push for a more open Pizzaplex like some of the beta versions had. Less elevators, less shutter doors, etc. But there's some pretty obvious performance restrictions that didn't let that happen. So the main point of changing the environment will be to knock out a bit of that more spook goal.
What do you mean, Links? It's scary, right?
Keeping the Pizzaplex all pristine like it currently is doesn't really make it that terrifying to be in, but luckily the perfectly clean, modern-looking animatronics and Pizzaplex are great for a feeling of unease and discomfort, like an empty Costco. I'd even say that a lot of areas that are run down and broken should actually be repaired back up, like getting rid of this junk, especially around Roxy Raceway. That way we can make the entire Pizzaplex feel uncomfortably perfect on the surface, only crumbling underneath. You can push this feeling by having the opening cutscene show more of the whole pizzaplex packed with crowds of people having fazzy fun, and then when you're actually around and playing, it's completely empty. A simple change that every Faz freak on the planet has suggested before is turning off the lights.
No! Why would you do that?
Getting dropped into a dark, silent pizzaplex right after a cutscene of it full of kids would be great for feeling creepier, maybe even liminal? Another important change I want is to get rid of these security bots. There can still be staff bots around, mopping some places, taking care of the kitchen or the laundry, etc., but the security bots made the place feel way too lively and populated for what we want, with patrol paths that are so obviously video gamey that it really took away from the scariness. Of course, the whole reason the security bots were there in the first place is because there's only 3 animatronic enemies and they're not even around most of the time. The security has to be there to act as the actual danger for players to run into. But that just means we'll have to find some other way to make the animatronics able to handle things all by themselves. As with current Security Breach, the 3 band members, Monty, Roxy, and Chica, are gonna be chasing you. But they'll need to change up quite a bit if we want to retain the constant pressure that security bots provided, and we'll probably want to address the lack of scariness they give off. One complaint I've seen with modern FNAF that I didn't really include in my list is the shift to advanced technology as a key part of the story. I bring this up because usually the personality and full sentience of the animatronics is a cited cause of the lack of scariness for people, and trying to address those problems actually led to a solution I find quite enjoyable. At the start, all the animatronics should have really stiff animations, and more importantly, only a set list of voice lines they can pick from. All these voice lines should make sense for what the animatronics would be designed for, which means none of them should be able to say Gregory's name or insult us.
I bet you don't even have friends.
They're only gonna have voice lines that make sense for an animatronic performer to say. Of course, the animatronics would still need voice lines telling kids when they're in a place they shouldn't be, or telling someone to follow them to security for help, so it'd still work for when they're looking for you. In fact, in some ways, the current game attempts some lines like that already, but I want to fully commit to only voice lines that would have a valid reason to exist. This would drastically reduce the amount of direct connection and comfort that Freddy can provide, and would help all the animatronics lean into that uncomfortable feeling we're going for with the environment. Plus, it'd be a clever excuse for repetitive voice lines. But if the only thing they could say was stuff like, "Hey, little guy, are you lost? Our friendly security staff can help," it'd get pretty boring. If you think about Monty chasing you super aggressively, he wouldn't sprint at you while saying, "Hey kid, I just want to help you." In fact, an animatronic performer wouldn't need to be able to sprint at all. Unless he was playing tag? A Security Breach redesign video I saw by Emma Artley, really good video, you should check it out, had the idea of giving each of the animatronics a special gimmick to appeal to kids. And piggybacking off of that concept, I figured we could give each member of the band a special children's game that they can play with guests. This would give them extra voice lines that could be used for horror stuff, but also kind of shape the way they each attack you. Another inspiration I was looking at when thinking about how to make just a few enemies cover a vast area like the Pizzaplex was Pac-Man. A little stupid, but each ghost in Pac-Man is specifically designed to keep the chase interesting. One follows behind you, so you have to constantly be going forward. One targets where you're going, so you can't just go straight. One is built to basically balance out the chaser, and the last one just kinda stays in the bottom left corner. Obviously, we aren't gonna take these behaviors exactly, and the scale of the Pizzaplex is much larger than a Pac-Man maze, but I just kinda wanted to give you some insight on how I approach the animatronics behaviors. I've always been more of a fan of the process than the result. Anyway, here's the result. Monty was the most obvious one and the one I started with. His game is tag, so he'll just kinda walk around in the open, not really putting in any effort to search for you, but once he spots you, he can run you down and catch you easily. He can even jump thanks to his repurposed Bonnie endoskeleton, since Bonnie's game used to be jump rope. I imagine there might be messages somewhere in the Pizzaplex being like, Bonnie's jump functionality is really dangerous, or the kids miss playing jump rope with Bonnie ever since we got rid of him. Monty isn't an instant loss, however. I imagine Monty would be especially susceptible to hiding spots, with him just being dumb enough that if you turn a corner and hide, he probably won't find you. But he might alert Roxy to where you are. Roxy plays hide and seek. She'll diligently search hiding spots and corners, listening for your movements, all while she's constantly taunting you about how she's gonna find you.
You can't hide forever.
As a whole, I think all of the bots will get fairly regular hints telling their AI, "Hey loser, the player's around here," getting more and more specific the longer you're lingering somewhere. That way the bots will always be pretty nearby. But Roxy's given far more hints as to where you are, and far more specific hints at that, because she's much more of a slow anti-camp mechanic. You could probably run away fairly easily, you just can't stay in a hiding spot forever. Although, if you make too much noise while running, she might let Monty know where you're going. But if Roxy and Monty are intertwined in functionality, what does Chica do? She's there to be annoying. I couldn't quite figure out a perfect children's game that suits her personality while also being an interesting way for her to look for you. However, I did come up with a few options that would basically make her role to break the normal flow of gameplay and interrupt your attempts to escape the others. One option is like Capture the Flag, where you just have to constantly find food around the Pizzaplex to make her stop chasing you. She could also have Hopscotch to match your exercise motif, where there'd essentially be traps around the Pizzaplex of hopscotch locations you'd be locked into if you run over them. Or hula hoop. That could... I don't know what that'd do. You could even have Chica walk around normally, but when she spots you, she lassos you into a game of tug of war and you have to win to escape. That wouldn't really make much sense for her character, probably fit Foxy more, but I'm just trying to figure something out for her. So while I unfortunately couldn't decide on a single game, I am a fan of the general idea of Chica being a distraction to break the flow of gameplay. Of course, if the entire band has these games to play with you, Freddy has to have one too. And, well, his game is already there in Security Breach. Simon Says. Or Freddy Says, I guess. I'm thinking more specifically the spoken Simon Says game, where you give people instructions, and if you said Simon Says before it, then they need to do it, and if you don't, then they shouldn't do it. This crucially allows Freddy to have some instruction-styled voice lines like jump and stuff, which is just perfect for his supporting role. This idea was fun though, so I thought about giving these games to all the other bots in the Pizzaplex too. Like, there's still some staff bots around that could be another form of just distractions/time wasters by prompting you to a game of rock, paper, scissors or tic-tac-toe if you try to pass them. As for the others, Sun and Moon could play musical chairs. Sun would literally just make you play normal musical chairs until the lights go out. And then Moon would let you move around, but only when he's playing music. If you're moving without the music going, he doesn't like immediately kill you, but he probably starts chasing you very rapidly. The endoskeletons already play red light, green light, so that one's pretty easy, but you could even have the Mimic do something similar since a lot of people think the Pizzaplex endos are based on the Mimic. Except maybe the roles are reversed where you have to stop moving when the Mimic is looking at you. And this could even hint at the theorized similarities between the Mimic and Sun and Moon, as musical chairs and red light, green light would function fairly similarly here. Now, don't get me wrong, the Mimic isn't going to be doing this in Security Breach at all. In fact, let's get point 3 of 5 off the list right now and say that I'm going to follow the original vision for Burntrap / the Mimic by just making him sometimes show up in the corner of your eye in the distance. Just an unknown scare that doesn't actually do anything, but its unpredictable and mysterious nature makes it scary nonetheless. However, there's one enemy I've been leaving out during all of this animatronic talk.
It is very similar to Vanessa and also Bunny.
Monty, Roxy, and Chica all have their unique ways of chasing you, but there's a key player from my Pac-Man comparison that's missing here, which is the constant chaser giving you that pressure to keep moving even when you think you're safe. And as per Mark 2 of the 5 ideas for Freddy's, that's gotta be Vanny / Vanessa. Yeah, not only will Vanny get more activity, but so will Vanessa because she basically only walks around once in the whole game, and most people miss that part. So we're making her a constant threat too. In fact, while some of the animatronics may become inactive for some story sequences or not be allowed in certain areas of the Pizzaplex, I imagine Vanny Nessa will always be active and able to go basically everywhere except for some obvious safe zones. Vanessa would just be your basic general threat. She knows roughly what room you're in at all times and will actively track you from room to room just to ensure that at least someone is always with you. Of course, this doesn't fully prevent you from staying in one place too long, but that's good for early game. Later, however, you'll run into Vanny, and Vanny knows exactly where the player is and slowly walks to your precise location like a snail towards an immortal being. The audio and video distortion of Vanny being nearby should help players know when she's getting closer, so there's actually a fairly small chance that Vanny herself ever catches you, but she can search hiding spots, and can even catch you while you're in Freddy, so she definitely can catch you off guard, but she's mainly there to pressure you into moving and making mistakes that get you caught by somebody else. Although, on that note, I want to make it clear that Vanny is the true danger in the Pizzaplex and that the animatronics aren't just programmed to kill you or something. So Monty, Chica, and Roxy are just trying to contain you and bring you to the night guard as per their programming for how to deal with a lost child after hours. So I imagine their jump scares are them just grabbing you and saying something like, "Let's bring you to security," while they drag you away to your death. You just gotta have some way to make the actual logistics of why you're getting chased and who you're getting killed by very clear to the player. Though I think it'd also be cool if this changes as you went through the nights, like the animatronics could get more aggressive over time, first shifting to slightly more violent ways of capturing that Gregory kinda fights against, similar to Ruin's jump scares, but then eventually just being a quick, immediate death straight from the source. But since we're already talking about some cringe gameplay semantics, we might as well... Let's start by talking about vision. Earlier I mentioned that the whole Pizzaplex should be dark, but I think enemies should still have their own lights. Like Vanessa already has her flashlight that you can just keep around to know where she is, but I think the main animatronics should also have lights projecting from their eyes. Not in the way that security bots do, mind you. These aren't showing the radius they can spot you in, this is just to show you generally where they are and where they're looking. Although Monty won't actually have these lights, as his sunglasses are too cool to let light penetrate them. I think also giving Vanny and Moon glowing eyes could be cool too. I imagine Vanny's glow is soft and more ambient because you already get plenty of warning of her being nearby. Meanwhile, Moon should have a more intense, focused light. And while I don't think the staff bots should have eye lights, most of the staff will be in areas that are still lit by signs and such. The only exception would be Mott bots that are out and about in the dark, and those are the ones you'll just have to react to when you catch them in your own lights. In the same vein as vision is cameras. Another one of the common complaints about Security Breach was how the cameras weren't useful. Again, I think they're fine, but I do think they could have had more of a purpose. Thankfully, we've kind of already addressed that. I think the changes in how the animatronics work helps encourage camera use a lot more already. Security Breach currently has a lot of escapability when you're found, so there's really no reason to not just run past everything you can. However, in my idea, Monty being near inescapable when he spots you means you're gonna want to keep track of where he is, especially since he doesn't do much to actively search for you, so you don't even really have a hint if he's close to you at any given time. Cameras would also help you know when Roxy was getting close to your hiding spot, as otherwise there's not much of a signal. And the cameras could even show you where Chica's traps are depending on how she works. On top of all that, the fact that all of the bots are always closing in on your location means that it will be important to predict exactly who's where at all times, unlike in current Security Breach, where they just kind of appear. Speaking of cameras though, the mini office sections have gotta go. They didn't really work. They weren't that bad, but if you really want classic FNAF gameplay in here, throw in a bonus game mode where you play as Vanessa or something, doing literal old FNAF gameplay like Sister Location's Custom Night. That'd be fine. However, something those offices do provide is security badges to unlock new areas, and those badges were a large part of why I envisioned Security Breach as a bit of a Metroidvania initially. The issue here is that Metroidvania upgrades aren't just keys to new doors like the security badges are. It actually makes more sense to think of the upgrades you get for Freddy as the Metroid element here, since they're upgrades to your moveset that just so happen to unlock new areas. Although you could also have more literal shortcuts open up as you reach certain areas. Like the elevator from the entrance area to the prize counter could be unlocked either when you first reach the prize counter or just automatically on a later night. Another key aspect of making the game more explorative and open is to make the game time progress naturally instead of being dependent on just completing objectives. This means you only have until 6 AM each night to do whatever you can manage to do in that time, which also ties into the idea of multiple nights. Though while thinking about this, I was reminded of all the sequences of the game you really shouldn't interrupt. Decommissioning each bot and then going through their whole bonus area afterwards just to escape into the open pizzaplex is pretty important to keep intact. If you could just destroy Chica and then chill until you're whisked away at 6 AM, that wouldn't be great. So a fairly straightforward solution is to require players to just reach the front doors before 6 AM. I imagine that we could even repurpose Moon's end of hour sequence from the original game to be an end of day sequence instead. At 5 AM, Moon would activate, maybe even with his musical chairs music as ambience for the final hour, to let you know that you need to pack it up and leave. And if you don't make it out, Moon's music will cut out like Freddy's music box in FNAF 1, and you'll be killed at 6 AM. Earlier I said repurpose Moon's end of hour sequence, and that's because I don't think you need to charge at the end of each hour with Freddy anymore. The way Freddy functions was something I wanted to tweak a lot, because a large complaint I want to address with scariness is how the Fazbear's chest cave was too much safety too often. My initial solution was just that he isn't allowed to enter most utility tunnels and maybe a few other rooms throughout the pizzaplex, just like how he's unusable in the arcade currently. I think restricting him like that works pretty well, but I would also limit Fred's battery capacity more, so you either have to use him less or charge him more, even in the areas he's allowed in. This is why I think charging Freddy each hour doesn't really make sense as a requirement, but a pretty obvious conflict between all these make the game real-time concepts and my desire to keep my ideas reasonable is that this is basically the only thing we have confirmation of not being reasonable.
Found a security office. You should be quite safe here.
Security Breach was originally going to be more open and real time, but they had to scrap that later for reasons that we could only speculate about. Although, because of that speculation, I guess we don't actually know if this original direction for the game was impossible. Maybe things only changed because they wanted to focus on story more than gameplay, so if we just refocus back on gameplay and solve the linear nature of the story in a different way, then this new gameplay option will work out fine. But that means we've been sailing this gameplay ship through rough waters, and there's a ton of plot holes in our hole that need to be patched. For example, I've been explaining the how of multiple nights, but I haven't even acknowledged the why. Why do you want to stay? I'll be frank. The story was one of the last things I thought about when changing Security Breach. It's a little hard to change a story we still don't even fully understand, so I'm actually kind of grateful that focusing on open world gameplay means that the story has to take a hit. but I'm still gonna have to make a lot of assumptions about the larger FNAF plotline to determine what I can and can't change, which I've already been doing by assuming that Vanny and Vanessa are the same, and that Burntrap and the Mimic are the same, so this was unavoidable. As I mentioned way back at the start, when talking about environment, I imagine the game opens with a pretty similar cutscene to normal Security Breach, showing off the hustle and bustle of the Pizzaplex. But when you awaken, you're not in Freddy. You're just Gregory, hiding out in Rockstar Row. No immediate dialogue or direction, you're just thrown into it. Although the lights are still on, and so is the ambient music and crowd noise of the atrium nearby, so you're not totally in the deep end yet. Currently, you can't escape Rockstar Row, so you're bound to eventually stumble across Freddy's room, the only room with its curtains slightly open and the door left ajar. In the back of Freddy's room, you'll find Freddy in his charging pod because bro just broke down on stage. When you let him out, Gregory's like, OMG, Freddy, but Fred's programming immediately recognizes a child in front of him, alone, in a place they shouldn't be. So your first interaction with Freddy ends up just being like, are you lost? Let's get you to security, superstar. And Gregory's doing his classic, shut up, Freddy, I can't go to security, she's evil and I hate her. Eventually, you look over to see Vanessa pass by the curtains, and Freddy, activating Fred mode, goes over to Vanessa to tell her about the lost child he just found. Of course, we don't want that. We just established that security girl bad, so you go through the same vent sequence as the original to get out of Freddy's room the other way. When you reach the end of the vent, Gregory looks out and sees Vanessa scolding Freddy for wasting her time. As she walks away, the usual "the Pizzaplex is about to close" intercom happens, telling everyone to leave except for the participants of the fun and safe sleepovers at the daycare. Newly scolded Freddy makes his way over to us, and Gregory tells the Fredster to scram because we need to get to the daycare since that'd probably be better than staying out in the open. Freddy still can't forcibly port us over to security since he's in safe mode instead of his usual highly dangerous mode, so he's stuck just helicopter parenting us while we get to explore. Now things have opened up a bit, and you're able to explore a couple paths towards the slide into Superstar Daycare. Both paths go into the atrium, which is currently heavily blocked off, and you're really only able to go along the sides. But as you're about halfway through the atrium, intercom comes up again like, "Psst, hey buckaroo, place is closed," and then the lights shut off. It's now that you see Vanessa in the middle of the atrium turn on her flashlight. Freddy Freddy's it up and calls Vanessa over again because of you still being classified as a lost child, so now's your chance to get out of his metaphorical parenting grasp and make the rest of the way to the daycare without getting caught by Vanessa. Skipping ahead to musical chair fun with Sun, the lights in the daycare are still on for reasons that Sun loves to remind you about through pre-recorded voice lines like, when the light's in the sky, the sun can play, but when the lights go away, the moon comes out to play instead, or something like that. I'm not a poet. But based Gregory is too busy dealing with his ulterior motives for being in the Pizzaplex in the first place. Investigating the security desk in the daycare, you can find some reports left there about missing kids, which I'm sure would have been shocking, except the whole reason Gregory's here in the first place is because the most recent missing kid was one of his close friends. The report mentions how Moon is unnaturally aggressive and maybe unsuitable for protecting children overnight, which might sound bad, but this is exactly what Gregory was searching for. And just in time for... Someone who isn't you just turned out the lights that you weren't supposed to, and this time the generators aren't just in the daycare itself. The end of the security note mentions that if there's ever a moon emergency, the breaker for the daycare lights is in the back of the theater. And I think this would count as a moon emergency. You still go around the daycare, but this time to find pieces of a code to unlock the front door. Once you escape, you make your way to the theater to find the generator, turning on the lights for the daycare, including the theater itself, pacifying Moon back into Sun. Although, when you're leaving the room with the generator, I'd want something like the "Did you see that rabbit lady?" cutscene to introduce Vanny, where instead of talking to Freddy, because Freddy isn't here, Greg's just like, huh? And then Well, I guess he'd just say, huh. But with rabbits now out of sight, Sun returns to our loving embrace and starts rattling off his voice lines about keeping the lights on as basically his best attempt at saying, bro, why'd you turn off the lights? But Gregory's here for blood, and that security note said that Moon might be the cause of the missing children, so we aren't done here. Sun keeps pestering us and prevents us from leaving the theater, but we can lure him onto the theater stage, get him distracted by Comedy Bot or something, then destroy him. Right outside the theater, Freddy is waiting. Greg still doesn't trust Fred though, so yeah, just exchange some "come with me, superstar, it's dangerous to be alone" and "shut up, Freddy, I don't need you," until eventually you're spotted by Monty, who then starts just straight booking it for you. This begins a mostly scripted chase sequence to teach you how each of the bots work. You hide from Monty, but Roxy will search wherever you're hiding, so you run away just to be caught by Chica's traps or distractions or whatever. And right when all seems lost, Freddy comes in and scoops you up into his stomach hatch. Gregory's obviously panicking as Freddy brings you away to what you would assume to be your Vanny-induced death. But eventually, Freddy plops you off at the entrance, and Gregory, still not fully trusting him, leaves. That's all of night 1, and trust me, that's the longest night to explain because that's the tutorial night. Gregory returns on night 2 because despite destroying the daycare attendant, you didn't exactly find the missing kids, and that mysterious bunny lady you saw might be involved too. But when you arrive, you see Vanessa talking to Freddy and bringing him down to the repair center because he didn't turn in the missing child to her, so something's obviously wrong with his programming. Greg decides to tag along out of pure curiosity and definitely not because he's worried about Freddy or anything. Once you get down to the repair room, Vanessa's locked up Freddy and limited his power as punishment. But thankfully, you can use the battery from the daycare attendant you just murdered to fix that. Afterwards, Gregory gets the rundown on how to hide in Freddy, and good old Freddington finally gives us the Faz watch. But that's all capped off with the realization that the Pizzaplex is gonna reopen in 4 nights, because we already had 1 night, so now it's 1 AM and you're thrown into the actual free roam gameplay with 4 nights to go investigate those missing kids. I imagine you can still find loose notes and emails like in the original game that can tell you some backstory on Vanessa and the Pizzaplex as a whole, and you'll even get hints as to some kind of rogue virus that's been detected slowly spreading throughout the Pizzaplex. Eventually, your search for the missing children could develop into a quest to purge the Plex of this mimic AI virus, as you realize that this virus is making the animatronics more aggressive, leading to the missing children in the first place. In fact, the mimic virus is actively infecting the main animatronics throughout the nights. That's why earlier I said their mostly passive jump scares would eventually turn into them literally just killing you. On top of deadly jump scares, I also imagine the animatronics will start having unnervingly fluid animations instead of their initial stiff robot ones. They also might start cutting up and mixing together their pre-recorded voice lines to form new sentences, or say entirely new lines in a flat, emotionless tone as if they're mimicking their own voice. Eventually, on night 5, they start saying your name. However, the story isn't exclusively dished out through these collectibles and subtle changes. There's several events I imagine could take place throughout the nights at specific hours, which I've conveniently plotted out because it was fun to think about. At 5 AM on night 2, Vanessa warns you over the intercom like, "Hey kid, if you're still wandering around here, you better leave soon," as basically an introduction to the end of night sequence. Speaking of which, this whole time I've been acting like Moon would be the one chasing you around, but that was actually some casual deception on my part. By this point, Greg's already destroyed Moon, so it'd be Eclipse instead. Or Shattered Moon, or whatever. I imagine Eclipse has to always be tethered to the ceiling to stay charged, since someone took his battery. And a lot of him would be limp, with his movements being herky and jerky because someone broke all of his bones. And as a fun gameplay thing, when you shine your flashlight on Eclipse whenever he gets too close to you, it'll stun him, similarly to Ruin. When you're leaving at the end of night 2, you could get a little cutscene where Gregory looks back and sees Vanny way in the distance doing her classic little wave, just as more of a Vanny teaser. At the start of night 3, the front door is locked, so you sneak in through a back way. Here you find an upgrade to your Fazwatch that gives you access to the map and cameras, and you use them to find where you are. Turns out you're in the warehouse, and this is the endo sequence from the base game that then leads into the repair chamber at the end, where you reunite with Freddy and can then freely explore for the remainder of the night. At 4 AM of night 3, Vanessa will make a final warning to you over the intercom, telling you it's way more dangerous here at night than foolhardy kids like you think. This threat is followed up on when you choose to leave at the end of night 3 because you can't. The front doors are still locked. Vanessa ambushes you and throws you in Lost and Found. Unlike the base game, she doesn't pretend to be helping you though, she's just pissed. Eventually, her voice trails off like she just realized she left the oven on, and she leaves you on your own to find the screwdriver and escape. I think the screwdriver is overall an upgrade that helps you find a few new areas, but mostly just gives you shortcuts and alternate paths around. But after a bit, Vanny makes her first proper appearance to chase you, and you'll have to look around the various side rooms in the entrance area to open the main doors and get out of there. From night 4 onward, Vanny will always be present instead of Vanessa. At the start of night 4, Freddy's locked in his room, fully inaccessible, so you're stuck without Freddy for the whole night. I think having an entire night where you're just stuck without him would be pretty terrifying and let you be a lot more thankful when you get him back later. At 3 AM of night 4, a pre-planned showtime test sequence starts, and you have to shut it off before the end of the night, otherwise you won't be able to leave since the doors won't open until it's over. During showtime, the entire atrium is lit up with distracting dance lights swinging around and music blaring, which makes it harder to notice any threats around you. This overbearing music only comes to a stop when you venture up past the animatronics who you can barely hear to the 3rd floor DJ desk to turn it off, leaving the atrium eerily quiet again. And those blinding lights will only disappear once you sneak your way past the animatronics, who can see you all too well, to the main stage to turn those off, plunging the atrium into uncomfortable darkness again. These can be done in any order at any time of the night as long as they're both done before you leave. I think this would be a fun side objective for a night that also kind of functions as a bit of a reset to remind you just how abnormal a fully dark, quiet Pizzaplex truly is. At the start of night 5, Gregory immediately rushes to Freddy's room, which is now unlocked, but instead of a fuzzy Faz friend, you find another side quest for the final night. Freddy's been trapped by Vanny in the bakery, Monty Golf catwalks, Bonnie Bowl, basically just hidden randomly in one of the areas that don't have much purpose for my plans otherwise. There's graffiti on the wall that hints as to which room he's in because I'd imagine that'd change on each subsequent playthrough. But aside from that, you have the rest of night 5 to do what you can to get the ending you want. But what exactly are you doing? So when you're plopped into the open freedom on night 2, you've really got 2 major goals to go for. Destroy the Mimic-infected animatronics, or free Vanessa from the Mimic virus. Both goals have 3 parts to them because, 3 animatronics, 3 Princess Quest machines, and you can do any amount of these objectives in any order. The first quest, Dismantling the Band, functions pretty similarly to how it is in the current game. The biggest change is with Monty. You don't go up to the catwalks, that's instead just a bonus area with an optional upgrade. On top of this, the golfing arcade machine is even more minigamey than it already was, with power-ups and such that's more so fun practice. Practice for Monty's Fight, where you play golf in the literal Monty Golf area while Monty is on the prowl. Once you complete all the holes, you can claim your prize up on the stage, which makes Monty leap up, tip the bucket of balls, and get destroyed, much like his current demise. Monty's upgrade is now his legs, which lets Freddy kick down fence gates in back areas of the Pizzaplex. Without his legs, Monty crawls around wildly. He can't spot you as easily, but he never slowly stalks around, so he's unpredictable and it'll be pretty tough to escape him. Chica's boss fight is the most exactly the same, with the Pizza Bot minigame, Death to Crusher, and then Trashland Adventure. Her upgrade is her voice box, which lets you pass through security doors with voice locks on them. However, this isn't an alternative to Monty's upgrade. The doors with voice boxes are specifically the main office areas around the Pizzaplex, basically the front areas that Monty's upgrade doesn't cover, if that makes any sense. Without her voice box, Chica probably functions the exact same as with her voice. Maybe she's just less stealthy, so it's easier to avoid her traps, but since she's louder, she draws more immediate attention to you if she does manage to get you. Roxy has her racing minigame on the track that she obviously should have had in the base game. You don't have to repair the head of a driving bot. Instead, I imagine something like having Gregory hoist up a car onto the track in one of the big construction machines. Then you race around the track as Roxy tries to throw things at you until she eventually jumps onto the track and gets smacked. Roxy's upgrade, her eyes, no longer spot collectibles since you could potentially get this as your first upgrade in the game, so that wouldn't make much sense as an ability. Instead, they continue the pattern of unlocking areas by allowing you to see secret doors or passageways that are mostly shortcuts, but some of them are small secret areas with optional upgrades in them. Without her eyes, Roxy walks around a lot more slowly, but is much more keen to sounds. She checks hiding spots if she doesn't hear anything, but she'll prioritize any sound she hears from the player, making it harder to slip away, but easier to avoid her getting to you in the first place. So, as you might have picked up on, each bot destruction quest follows a similar formula. You play a minigame to destroy them, you get an upgrade that unlocks new paths and areas, and the destroyed bots are now easier to avoid getting found by, but much harder to escape once you are found. But I think having a similar structure for each mission like this is fine because you'll likely be bouncing between these destroy quests and the princess quests. Speaking of which, the Princess Quest machines can be done in any order, but each machine will always be in the correct order for story reasons. So the first machine you play is always Princess Quest 1, no matter what machine that is. One of the machines is in Rockstar Salon. Inside the salon are a ton of hair-cutting staff bots moving around, cutting the hair of other staff bots, saying all their quirky lines like, "You look stunning," "Thank you, I will leave a tip." You have to stealth your way to the back by crawling under desks and staying hidden so that you can reach a reset breaker that shuts down all the salon bots, allowing you to go through the salon more safely and access new rooms. However, Vanny/Vanessa will now start roaming this area. One of the rooms has the PQ machine, and one of the rooms has the hoodie upgrade, which makes you harder to spot. Next is the arcade, which plays out basically the same as the original game. The first part of the arcade section, turning the power on and letting DJ Music Man move around, could be part of Roxy's Dismantle quest. Like you could have players run power through the arcade down into Roxy's Raceway so you can use some of the machines there. But the second half of finding the 4 breakers around the arcade and resetting them all is part of this Princess Quest mission. After resetting the 4 breakers, the DJ chase ends in a small rhythm game, and after that, DJ Music Man will go back to being chill, so the area is safe and fully unlocked. Just like with the salon, Vanny/Vanessa will now patrol, the Princess Quest machine is now available, and you can find the shoe upgrade in one of the newly unlocked areas to increase your running speed. Originally, the shoe upgrade was in the salon, but I moved it over here because I thought it would be neat to have the upgrades relate to what you did to unlock each area, so stealth upgrade for stealth section, sprint upgrade for sprint section. Though I'm much less clever with the last one, Phaser Blast, which just combines the usual capture the flag minigame with the Vanny boss battle in the base game. Capture the flag will always prevent you from exploring this area too much until you win it, but instead of Chica roaming around, Vanny roams around the arena while you play. Once you've captured all the flags, you can explore the area freely, including going up to Vanny's room, but Vanny/Vanessa may still be around. You can find the PQ machine in Vanny's room, and you can find a permanent Phaser Blaster upgrade at the normal prize counter location to help you get away from bots. And like all the other upgrades, you aren't mandatorily funneled towards it. It's just if you decide to explore the Phaser Blast location you've now unlocked, you'll probably find it. Also, to spice things up, the Phaser Blaster's 6 charges don't recharge. You'll have to find a recharge station in order to fill up your ammo. That'd make things significantly harder, but I've heard some complaints about the Phaser Blaster and camera invalidating any scariness the game had because of how easy they made it, so that's what we're addressing here. That also means that the Phaz Cam from Monty Golf doesn't exist anymore because it was always a bit redundant. I'll also clarify that beating Princess Quest 3 doesn't automatically end the game. Each time you clear a PQ machine, Vanny gets more and more aggressive, like a funny Slender Man, until you clear the third one where Vanny will disappear entirely, and any Vanny/Vanessa dependent events won't happen after that. But it isn't until you go to the front door at the very end of Night 5 that you finally get your My ideas for the endings are fairly simple. In fact, I'd want to keep the comic book style for endings, just make them more interesting with a bit more animation and better transitions between panels rather than just slow camera pans. Outside of that, most of the endings depend on how much of the objectives you completed by the time you leave on Night 5. If you free Vanny, but don't dismantle all the bots, you get an ending about Vanessa being thankful, but the bots still causing trouble and capturing kids. Gregory and Vanessa try to figure out what's going on with the bots, but Vanessa gets fired for tampering and bad odor because that'd be a fun callback, and Gregory has to retreat to the streets. I imagine some panels of the comic could be changed depending on which bots you have and haven't killed yet, because that's a big advantage of the comic panel style for these endings. If you dismantle all the bots but don't free Vanny, there's an ending about the bots being replaced over time and Vanny corrupting those too. Then maybe there's some hints about the PQ machines and their locations, as those are probably the more obtuse objective to figure out. And of course the hints can change depending on how many machines you've already gotten. There can also be some of the usual endings from the original game for when you leave without completing either quest. Like the bad ending from the base game is still the bad ending for when you do none of the other requirements and don't save Freddy on Night 5. If you do save Freddy but still don't meet any of the other requirements, you'd get that one car ending. Then maybe you can have the VIP fire ending for when you've done at least 3 objectives total but haven't completed either full quest line. The true ending, for when you dismantle all bots and complete all Princess Quest machines, has Freddy actually stop you before you leave. For the first time in the game, he starts mixing together his pre-recorded voice lines to essentially tell you that whatever virus was infecting everyone else, he thinks has gotten him too. It doesn't impact him too much as long as he's in safe mode like he currently is, but if you want to truly clear all traces of this program, you need to take care of him as well. Freddy then reboots himself out of safe mode, and you have to flee back to Phaser Blast where Vanessa is waiting. During this is Freddy's boss fight, where you have to obey his Freddy Says commands. Messing up the commands will get you killed. You have to make your way up to Vanny's room, where you and Vanessa then push Freddy off the top, shattering him when he hits the ground. You collect Freddy's head, which is now free from the program, and you get the original game's Princess Quest ending sequence from there. You might notice a severe lack of something from the original game that was a very big part of the endings, and yeah, no Afton ending at all. This is basically because there's no Afton. The Mimic/Burn Trap has no boss fight and no associated ending because he's just there as a spooky Herobrine apparition in your peripheral vision. Although there is a secret ending. When you complete all 3 machines, it unlocks a path in Roxy Raceway, which has you traverse down below using every upgrade from all 3 decommission objectives. Down here, you'd find some of the, well, honestly, some of the nonsensical lore tidbits that felt important enough to have to be here somehow. The blob's still here, and there's some hints connecting that vague figure you keep seeing in the corner of your eye to the Mimic virus. But when you find the charging tank at the end, it's empty. And when you get too close, Vanny comes out of nowhere with a steel chair. And that's about it idea-wise. I think this covers the 5 ideas for Freddy's we had going in, and I personally think it sounds pretty cool. But I'll admit that not all of this is totally reasonable, and I certainly wasn't comprehensive enough for someone to actually make a full game out of this pitch. Especially when it came to the story, I didn't talk about many specific ideas for backstories in the emails, or how this ties into the Mimic or the future of Vanny or any of that. I just didn't talk about what I didn't feel like figuring out an answer for, because this was just for fun. So I don't really have a grand takeaway here, I just hope you enjoyed thinking about game design with me. Although, if you take away one thing from this, know that the Pizzaplex has 3 separate arcades, all of which are on the 3rd floor, which is just frankly bad business.